Good to be here with you guys tonight. Guys, so glad that we are not outside for an outside gathering tonight because it is a hot one. I'm so excited to be here. And like Gabby said earlier in announcements, we are kicking off a new series tonight called Well, That Sucks. And in this series, we're going to be talking about exactly what it sounds like, exactly what Gabby said, things in life that honestly just sometimes suck, and things in life that are really difficult and really hard. And so through this series, we're going to be talking about how can we allow God to carry us through those seasons? How can we navigate those really hard things, those really honestly sucky things that happen in life sometimes in a healthy way? And the reason I say, how can we allow God to carry us through those seasons of our life, those difficult situations in our life, is because something I love about God is that he doesn't force a relationship on us. And so God says, I'm here, I'm available, my door is always open to you, but you have to choose to come invest in relationship with me. And so we're going to be talking about that through this series. How can we be choosing God, and how can we allow him to carry us through and experience him through the difficult things that we go through in life? And God talks so much in the Bible about how he is near to us when we go through hard things. And in Psalm 23:4, God says, or it says, even when I walk through the darkest valley, I will not be afraid, for you are close beside me. Your rod and staff protect me and comfort me. And so God says, I'm there, I'm here. You just got to come invest in relationship with me. So tonight we're going to be talking about a little bit heavier of a topic. Tonight we're going to be diving into grief. And the definition of grief, if you aren't sure, is just deep sorrow, especially caused by someone's death. And so tonight, like I said, it's going to be a little bit heavier of a topic, but the reality is that if you haven't already experienced losing someone in your life, at some point in your life, you're going to experience that. It's just a part of life. Loss is a part of life. And so we're going to talk about that tonight and talk about, again, how can we allow God to carry us through that season? How can we deal with grief in a healthy way? And so I'm super grateful to have my friends up here tonight, Caleb, Tianna, and Sara. And so super grateful they're willing to share as they have all lost someone in their lives. And so grateful because it's not always easy to talk about something like this, but they wanted to be up here tonight so that they can encourage you guys and talk to you guys about all that God has taught them through experiencing loss in their lives. And so, guys, as we get started, I just want to ask you guys to go ahead and share your names, even though I just said it. Just say your names so everyone knows who's who, and then just share who you lost in your life, and then give us one word that describes what that experience was like for you when you heard the news that you lost someone.
Yeah, so Caleb, for those of you that don't know me, I lost my dad. It would have been 3 or 4 years ago now, and a little bit of context for how it happened. It was completely out of the blue, didn't expect it at all. Had actually lost my grandma like 2 weeks prior to that, and I was in the 56 room over here, and I was at a staff Christmas party. We were like playing games and stuff. And I got the call from my mom, and I thought that it would be like arrangements for my grandma's funeral or something like that. And then, just with the words that she could muster, she said, hey, like, your dad passed. I'm so sorry to have to tell you this way, but this would happen. And that was the first time. So, like, my word would be shock. And it was the first time that I had heard something, and my body actually started to physically respond before my mind could fully wrap its way around it. And that sounds so weird, but literally, I was like, time out, I didn't hear that right. Like, I was doubting it a lot as it was floating in my head, but, like, my body actually started to feel faint to the point where I had to get outside and like, get some fresh air and compose myself. So I would say, yeah, mine would probably be shock.
So my name is Tianna, and I lost my mom 2.5 years ago to pancreatic cancer. So it was 2.5 years of watching someone get sick and die in front of you. So I would say when it actually happened, it was heart-wrenching, and just like Caleb said, it's a feeling that you physically feel. It's a heartbreak that you can't explain, but you just feel it, and it's gut-wrenching. But we were relieved at the same time because we have the hope of heaven, and we knew that this life had nothing to offer her anymore. So heart-wrenching and relief when she finally did pass away.
My name is Sara. Is this one still on? Yes? No? Yes? Okay.
Yeah.
We'll just do this. This is much louder than that one. My name is Sara, and I lost my dad as well, but much longer than these guys. I lost my dad 23 years ago, so when I was 14. And he had renal cell carcinoma, which is kidney cancer, and it was a really fast-growing kidney cancer as well. So I've been thinking about this question, and I actually have 2 words to describe what it was like. because we found out like in February that he had the cancer, and they had a surgery appointment all set up, and basically the doctors went in and they closed him right back up and did absolutely nothing because they didn't think they could do anything. So like that for me, I was just lost because I didn't understand what was happening. I mean, I was your guys' age, and I was sitting in this room with my mom and my brother and a family friend, and they're saying that they just opened him up and they couldn't do anything. And I was like, I don't know what you're really saying. And the family friend was basically like, Sarah, your dad is dying. And I was like, oh, okay. So we had some hope in there a little bit, but then mostly the diagnosis was that he just wasn't going to make it. It was just too fast and too aggressive. So we had the whole summer right before I started high school to spend with him. So like it was like a pre-grief. Like we could grieve before it because we knew it was going to happen. And he ended up passing my second day of high school before I even started school that day. And when I found out, when I woke up that morning, it was just gutted. You know, it's just one of those things like you knew it was going to happen, but you still feel it so visceral, like you guys were saying. It's something that you just can't describe it fully until you've experienced it yourself, unfortunately. And it's something I wouldn't want anybody to experience in any capacity. I always say, I've even told this to Caleb before, I feel like I am so fortunate in the way that I lost my father than the way he lost his. Because at least I had time to process it beforehand, to know what was going to happen, whereas his was just so sudden that he had no time.
Wow. Guys, thank you so much again for being so open and honest and vulnerable to share with us. And even as you guys share about just the feeling of shock and gutted and just like the physical pain, something that comes to mind is how when you're feeling those emotions, it can feel so easy to not really want to talk to anyone about that. And so often in life, I think when we go through anything hard, it can be so tempting to just kind of put on this face of like, I'm okay. Or I'm going to be strong, because maybe you feel like there's people around you who are also affected that you feel like you need to be strong for. And so it's so easy to just kind of hide it from other people. But God talks so much in the Bible about how he doesn't want us to grieve alone. He doesn't want us to go through hard times alone. In Romans 12:15, God says, be happy with those who are happy and weep with those who weep. And when he says that, he's meaning like you need to surround yourself with people who are willing to cry with you, who are willing to sit in the pain with you, and who are willing to sit in that darkness and walk alongside you in that. But it can be so hard to be willing to open up to people. And so my question for you guys is, how did you allow trustworthy people and people who are encouraging to walk alongside you in your grief? What was that like for you?
Yeah, I'll start. Well, I was 14, so I probably didn't do it so hot. You know, it was mostly my mom and my brother that was there for everything, and my grandpa, too. He lived about 5 minutes away from us, and he was actually there the morning my dad passed. So afterwards, he stepped in and became a father figure to me. But I know I didn't talk about it much to people because people didn't know what to say to me. And like I said, we had that whole summer, but I was attending this youth group, and the youth pastor actually made me talk about it a lot. Which was fine. I was okay with that because I could do that. But it became that thing that people then just knew me as the girl whose dad died from cancer. So that was rough, especially since it was like the second day of high school. And that's all people knew me as for like the first 6 months of school. But the people that I did surround myself with, I made some really good friends who are actually still friends to this day because they walked alongside me because of that. So the people that do walk beside you in grief are people that you will always remember. Even if you don't spend time with them anymore afterwards, they are still such a special part of your life because they did walk with you through that hard thing. I know, like Caroline was saying, that sometimes you like try to be tough and strong, and I definitely did that for a good long while because I felt like my mom needed that. I felt like she needed myself and my brother to be that, and my brother felt like he had to be my dad, which was not cool. But it was definitely one of those things that I didn't do it well at first, but then over time, as grief settled, as I became more comfortable with the fact of I am the girl whose dad died of cancer. You know, there's nothing I can do to erase that. So I have to own that in a way and make it my own and be comfortable with that and know that that is a part of my story and how can I use that. And so that's over time. I've had 23 years to come to that, to know that that is part of my story, and it's how I know God better is because of this time in my life. So it's definitely one of those things that I probably didn't do it well at 14, but I did it better year after year. But yeah, you do need to surround yourself with people who will cry with you. At 14, it was hard for people to actually like do that well, my peers. But I had adults in my life who did that very, very well.
Yeah, I kind of think of two layers with it. So on one hand, I'm really thankful for the tight-knit family that I had, like going into all of that. And it's interesting, like oftentimes when you encounter someone that's grieving, the first thing that you think of is like what do you say? Like, not how are you doing? Obviously you're not doing good, right? Like there's no way to even start this off, right? And one of the most comforting things that I remember of, and these are like particular moments with family members where times where no one really needed to say anything, it was just our presence was there together. And like sometimes that would just be sitting in silence. Sometimes it would be like sitting together and just like ugly crying, but like realizing that when someone is grieving like that and someone is mourning like that, I don't think it's ever their expectation that someone's going to swoop in and say the magical thing. In fact, oftentimes that like cheapens it. It's like there's nothing really to be said. We just need to work through the natural emotional roller coaster of this thing. So one was really just thankful for the family that I had going in. And then the second thing would be, was really, really thankful for the church community that we had at the time too. And so many different layers of that, like just so many people reaching out and giving support in practical ways, even just little notes. Like there's just so many different ways that people poured out support, and we were really grateful for that too, so.
Yeah, mine would definitely be my family as well. So one of four, so we have a big family, and we definitely came together through that. Like Sara said, I mean, I was 26 when my mom died, but none of my friends had lost a parent. And I couldn't connect with my friends anymore because they still wanted to do normal things, and life was not normal for me anymore. And unfortunately, everything that they did say was not the right thing in my mind. It wasn't what I wanted to hear, or it's not what I needed at the time. And I wasn't having relationships with my friends where they were sitting alongside me crying. And so I definitely pulled back from friendships and realized that, you know what? Life is so much more than the things that everyone else is getting caught up in, and I need real relationships. So dug super deep in with my family, my sisters, my brother, my dad. Have a great relationship with my dad that never would have been there before. So praise the Lord for that. But, and honestly, I did a grief share group here at LCBC, and that community was awesome. To just be around other people who feel it, who get it, who are just in the battle with you, the everyday struggle of longing for eternity, but yet what's my purpose for today? Because that's what it's like when you lose someone so close to you.
Yeah, and it's so crazy how God can use other people in our lives to help us heal and to bring comfort. And something I'm hearing each of you say is just the difference it was to even, like Caleb, you said, literally just have people there with you and just like sitting in it with you physically, and just the comfort that brought. And hearing each of your responses makes me think of how it also it required you to be willing to be vulnerable and open and actually talk about how you're feeling and not just bottle up those emotions, which is something I think that also can be hard for all of us. It's just a human instinct when we're going through something difficult to just want to sweep the emotions under the rug or bottle them up because we don't want to face the pain of our emotions because it hurts too much. And so God talks about that too. He says in Matthew 5, God says, blessed are those who mourn. And so God says, actually, if you allow yourself to go through those emotions, you allow yourself to face that pain and feel it, even though it's hard, I'm going to bless you in that. And that verse is so interesting. Blessed are those who mourn. I think that's just like an interesting verse of like, how am I going to be blessed if I'm mourning? Like mourning sucks and it's hard and it's painful. And so I actually looked up what exactly does that verse mean. And in my study Bible, it says being blessed by God means experiencing hope and joy independent of outward circumstances. And so it's God promising, like, if you choose to allow yourself to face those emotions, not bottle them up, then I'm going to give you hope and joy despite the fact that you're experiencing grief right now and that you lost someone you loved. And I think that's such an incredible promise. And so my next question for you guys is, what has it looked like in your life to process through the emotions of loss and not just bottle them up and just avoid them or sweep them under the rug? And maybe you haven't always done that well at times. And so what has that been like as well?
Okay, I'll start. So for me, I started journaling right away. and just writing it all out. Honestly, I felt like for 2.5 years, I called out to God, and he knew everything on my heart. And then when my mom died, I didn't have anything to say to him anymore. Like for at least 2 or 3 months, I struggled to talk to him, to communicate, because I felt like, I don't know, dude, like what happened? Like, where are we at? Where am I at with you? So I started journaling, and that was such a good outlet for me. I also sought counsel, and I went to see a therapist, and that was one way that it really got me to open up and share feelings that I probably would have just put under the rug.
It's a really good question that I don't have a really good answer for. Honestly, like, there are absolutely times that I fell into like the just kind of bottle it up kind of territory. And it was interesting hearing the theme kind of emerge too, where when tragedy and stuff like that strikes, oftentimes what you'll think about is needing to be strong for the people that are around you. And that's just a difficult thing to fall into. So I would still say that I'm totally there at times. It's also funny that you brought up going to counseling, because that's something that I've been pursuing as well. Just being able to process that in a healthy way. But yeah, it's one of those things, at least like right when the situation hit for me, and this is so stupid looking back on it now, but I'll just be honest with you. It hit, and obviously like there's a lot of just reacting to things at first, but then it got to a point where I was like, I'm just gonna go into this room right now, some random room in my parents' house. I was like, I'm gonna close the door, I'm gonna get in here, I'm gonna feel everything I need to feel. I'm gonna get all out right now. I'm gonna leave it in this room, and I'm gonna leave and shut the door, and it's gonna be moving forward. And I literally tried that, and it was one of the dumbest things. So, got a good cry out or whatever, but that's just not how mourning works. That's not how grief works. And it's just kind of this roller coaster that it hits sometimes at the most random times, and like you just need to move through it. So, yeah, all that to say, that's something I haven't done particularly well, but continuing to learn some things. So.
Yeah. So with me, like I said, I felt like I needed to be strong for my mom, but also, too, I was pissed at my mom. So my dad died early in the morning on that Tuesday, and she didn't wake us up. She knew something was wrong, and she knew something wasn't right, so she called my grandpa, and he came over. And my house growing up, my bedroom was at the front of the house, and I woke up probably about like 3 o'clock in the morning, which was so unusual for me. I love to sleep, and I'm a heavy sleeper, so nothing will wake me up. But apparently that day, the floodlights woke me up, and I was like, oh, Mom must be taking Maggie out, our dog. And then lo and behold, I find out later that she turned on the lights to let my grandpa in, because she called him because she's like, I don't want to be alone right now. And I was like, well, why didn't you come get me and Jared? Like, why couldn't we sit with you in these last moments? Why couldn't we be there for that? And she's like, I didn't know fully that that's what was happening. And plus, too, I didn't want you to see your dad that way. And so I was really pissed at her for a long time. And I never told her, but I also, too, bottled that pissed offness inside of me, and I didn't let her know that I was pissed off with her. And I worked through that myself. And then like a couple years later, probably like when I was a senior in high school after I graduated, I said to her, we were driving down the road, and I said, hey, Mom, do you know that I was pissed off at you right after Dad died? And she goes, no, why, what? And I told her the whole story, and then she's like, we're sitting there in the car just bawling our eyes out, being like, I didn't mean to do that to you, Sarah. And I'm like, I'm so sorry, I was angry at your mom. We should have talked about this more. And that's one thing, actually, I was telling Mom that I was doing this today, and when I was like, Mom, one of the things I really wish we had done was go to counseling. And this was the late 90s, and so like, I know before any of you guys were born, but counseling wasn't as readily accessible back then, and it wasn't something that was super popular or actually accepted as well. And it was not affordable at all as well, so that's probably another reason why we didn't do it. But we both, all three of us, my brother too, were like, we probably should have done that. That would have helped us so much better, because we would have been able to talk in a way that we didn't feel like we could talk to each other about. For sure.
Yeah.
Especially because sometimes as a family, when you grieve, you're all grieving differently. So sometimes it's hard to do that together, because and your relationship with whoever you lost, especially a parent, is different than your sibling's relationship with that parent. So yeah, I mean, we definitely opened up as a family, but sometimes you needed to go and do it by yourself.
Yeah, and even like a counselor too, like someone outside of your family, someone outside of this situation is super helpful too. And Tianna, you talked about how something that was super helpful for you, not bottling your emotions, was just journaling and talking to God. And I know, just knowing each of you and being in conversation with each of you guys about this, that God has been such an anchor for you in your journey of loss. And I think something that's so encouraging about God is just knowing that he was a human being who walked the earth and experienced all the emotions that we experience as human beings. And Jesus actually experienced grief because he lost his friend Lazarus. And it talks about that in John 11 and how he cried when Lazarus died. And so he understands what grief feels like. And I'm sure that's something that's so comforting for you guys, knowing that we don't have a distant God who's unfamiliar with pain or with grief or with loss, but God understands loss. And so he's someone who you can go to knowing that he gets it, and his heart empathizes with yours. And so my question for you guys is, how has God been an anchor in your journey of loss, and what part has he played?
Yeah, at least in my situation, one of the things that I was so very grateful for was having really wrestled with a lot of like the hard questions prior to like the tragedy itself happening, just because I already had like some foundation from which to pull from. And even like right when everything was happening, it was like honestly, at least in my situation, like I really didn't second guess my relationship with God. I wasn't necessarily angry with him or anything like that. And again, like a lot of that was because I feel like I did some of that wrestling prior to it even happening, but just like scripture immediately came up. There's a passage in James 1 that talks about counting trials as pure joy, which is just like, how could that possibly make sense? But then like you think about it further, and it's just like, for those of us that are following Jesus, like God will use those trials in your life to draw you closer to him. And there is literally nothing more important than that. And then starting to kind of like bring your perspective and bring your scope out from the immediate circumstance would suck 100%. Like no one's arguing that. But the reality is like, we're all gonna live for eternity, and in any of those situations and any of those circumstances that we run into, like God promises, he says, hey, like I'm gonna turn it for your good. Like that's Romans 8. Like I'm going to weave this together with all of the control that I have, with all of the situations. Like nothing is surprising to me, nothing is shocking to me. I have control over every single bit of this, and you might not be able to understand it because of your human limitations, but I do, and that's all that matters. So it's that kind of thing. You just like lean into it, and within my own experience, but then also like navigating some of that stuff with other people. It's when people hit tragedy, one of two things tends to happen. Either you start to completely neglect your faith and get mad at God and just kind of ditch out, or you start to really lean in and wrestle. And in that wrestle, I mean, we were just talking about it this weekend at church with the weekend gathering. It's like in that wrestle where there is a completely different level of richness and intimacy with relationship with God that starts to make sense of a passage in James 1 where it's like counted as joy. And it's like, oh, I guess I can kind of understand it now. So it's not that it makes everything better. It doesn't make it better. It still sucks. But you can see how God is working through all of it regardless.
I love that.
Yeah, so throughout the 2.5 years my mom was sick, he was definitely my anchor because there was nothing else to hope for except for healing. And so there was I felt like my faith was always so strong because I was believing in miracles and everything that God stands for. And so I don't feel like there was ever a time where, I got angry and I asked the questions, but I don't feel like there was ever a time where I was like, I don't believe anything anymore. But instead, the moment, and I've shared this with our ladies before, but the moment that she died, so up until the point where she died, I had a relationship with Jesus, but it was never deep. It was surface. It was, I come to church, I love Jesus, I want people to go to heaven. But the moment that she died, my whole life changed because I needed him as my everything. I needed him as my best friend. And he went from my head to my heart, and that relationship was deepened. And I've experienced him in ways that have been so stinking cool that if I wouldn't have gone through the loss, I probably wouldn't know him the way that I do now. And so definitely my firm foundation and the reason that I am able to get up and go forward every single day, and the Christians around me as well. I always say that there's days that I am weak, but I feel strong because of my fellow sisters and brothers in Christ who are praying over me and my family.
So for me, when my dad was sick, my dad became a Christian when he was 40 years old, and he passed away when he was 47. So he was a new Christian, and he was very sure about his faith, and he was very opinionated about his faith, and he was very this is who I am. This is what I believe now. He was very much, okay, I made the decision, I'm going to go with it from my whole heart. And so I remember the time before he was a Christian and after he was a Christian. And so for me, when my dad died, it was seeing his absolute surety that he was going to die and it was going to be okay that made me go, okay, so this Christianity thing, I believe Jesus is who he says he is, and he died on that cross for me, but I now see that it's about a relationship. It became so much more real for me than just to be a good Christian, I have to out-Christian my brother, be nicer than my brother. That's really what I was trying to do most days. But it was seeing my dad with that absolute surety that when he died, he was going to be in heaven. And it's because he had that relationship with Jesus. And I was like, okay, I get it now. I understand it more fully than I ever did before. And it was it's those times when you're grieving and when you're going through loss, like Dave said as well, that you are the closest to God if you so choose to. And I tell people that's one of the closest times I've ever felt God in my life. And I've seen God, when I look back over the 23 years since then, I've seen God working because of this one moment in my life. I would not be sitting here on this stage right now if my dad was still alive. I'd be in Florida, probably a school teacher. But I would not be here. It's because of my dad dying that things are the way they are in my life. The relationship I have with God is the way it is. Would I wish my dad to be here today? Absolutely. But I know my life would be completely different than it is today. So I always tell people, you have that choice, like Caleb said. You can go one or two ways. I had a friend whose sister was very, very ill, and he was like Tianna. He's like, he's going to perform a miracle. That's what he's going to do. He's going to heal my sister. And she passed away. And he completely turned his back on his faith. And this was a kid who was sold out for Jesus. He was the president of all the Christian clubs at school. He was sold out. And then this one thing didn't go the way he thought it should. And he turned his back on him completely. And I was just this was after my dad had passed. And I was like, but he did heal her. She has no more pain. She has no more sickness. And she'd been suffering her whole life. So I would encourage you that if you are going through something like this or something that's grieving in your life, to lean into that relationship with God so much more and don't turn away. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to question and be like, why us, God? Why? But please, 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 still cling to that relationship. Don't walk away from it. Your life will be so much better because of it. And so much more full, too. It's weird saying that because obviously I don't have my dad, but my life is so full because of Jesus. Even without my dad.
Wow, thank you so much for all of that, guys. And it's so cool. Each of your stories is such a testament to God's faithfulness despite the painful things that can happen in life. And a word that comes to mind as you guys are speaking is just how God redeems and how God can use even the most painful things in our lives, including someone that we love so much dying, to use it for good and draw us closer to him. And just hearing you guys talk about, I was never that close to God before, and I'm so full. I feel so full because of Jesus, despite the loss that I have. God is so good, even in the really hard things that we go through. So thank you guys so much for sharing all that. But one last question I have for you guys. If there's one thing you could encourage students with about navigating through loss, what would it be?
Tianna briefly said it. Everyone grieves differently, and that's okay. It is okay that you don't cry. If that's not you, that's okay. You don't have to cry. If you are a crier, please cry. You cannot judge someone because they grieve differently than you. They might be feeling the same deep sorrows, but they just show it in a completely different way. And if you have the opportunity to go get counseling for it, please, please, please do, because I feel like that is something that I wish we had done. I feel like I would have worked through a lot of things so much quicker in my life if we had done that. But know also, too, that you will get through whatever hardships you are going through. It is just a season, and it is a time. There's that Bible verse that says there's a season for everything, and it's just a season. This is just a blip in your life, and you will move on, but it won't be moving on like you think it will. Like, grief always will stay with you. It looks different than it did in 1998 than it does in 2021. I saw something on Facebook the other day about your grief. Everybody thinks your grief shrinks, but it stays the same. You just build your life around it. And it hits that wall at different times, and that's okay. It's okay to have bad days, and it's okay to have good days. Just because you're going through something hard doesn't mean you can't have a good day, and you can't have fun, and you can't laugh and make jokes, because joking is great.
That's so practical though, and even just as you said, like people grieve differently. It's one thing to give yourself that space when you find yourself in that situation to be like, well, I guess I don't need to fit this mold, or I don't need to do whatever checklist you have in your head to do this right, as if there's a right way to grieve. But then also remembering that for other people as well. We all are a part of smaller communities here. We call them small groups. Like, keep in mind, if you're sitting in this talk right now and you're like, I haven't really lost anyone, and I guess I might just file it away for another time. No, you can support other people, and you should support other people. God may put an opportunity right in your lap where someone close to you has lost someone close to them, and you have the opportunity to come alongside of them and be that support. So that would be one thing. And then the second thing that I would throw out, and I mentioned it briefly before, but to jump in on it more, there is something about the raw emotions that tragedy brings up that starts to take oftentimes like an undeveloped faith, and you just need to be all in then. And just thinking about like that word of wrestle, like what it means to wrestle with God. Think about like the strong relationships that you have in your life. Chances are they are strong not only because of the good times, but because of the bad times too. Because you've had knockout, drag-out fights, because you've got through stuff together. And even thinking through what that wrestle looked like for me personally, like there were mornings or there were times where I would literally get on my knees and say, God, this is exactly how I feel. And I just need you to meet me right now and change me from the inside out, because I can't feel like this anymore. There is something just guttural and real and authentic where all of a sudden we're like, I don't even know if God's going to meet me right here, and he does. And there's no other explanation for it. There's not, hey, like, it's because I journaled and talked to a friend or whatever. No, like God literally worked in my life and changed me from the inside out and drew me closer to him and gave me a peace that completely surpasses understanding, where again, would encourage you, if you ever find yourself in a situation where a thing like that comes up, just wrestle with God. And there's so many like biblical evidence for it too. If you ever read in the Psalms, David wrote so many Psalms where you read them and you're like, he talked to God that way? Like, is that even allowed? Like, yes, God wants you to be painstakingly honest with him because he already knows where you're at. He just wants you to express it to him in trust and in love, and that's exactly where he's going to meet you. So, yeah, that's what I throw out.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that they said. I would just totally encourage you, if you are through a season of grief or when you ever encounter it, because you will, just live in it. Don't try and compare it to someone else's. Do what works for you. And I would also just encourage you to feel like and know the truth that you're not alone in that grief. Even when it feels like it, and when you feel like there is no way there's a God, that you're not alone, that he's closer than he's ever been before, and that his arms are wrapped around you in that moment, and he is there right beside you. So just know that you're not alone in your grief, and it is a season, but I totally believe that our pain and our suffering, Jesus went through it too, and it's all for a purpose, and it's to give him glory. And I know that's hard to hear when you are going through it, but I can promise you at the end of the day, it is to give God glory, and your pain and suffering is not going to go to waste. And that if you dig deep into that purpose and ask God, okay, show me, take me where you need me to go with this pain, this suffering. Look at 3 of us sitting up here. I'd rather not be on a stage talking about this, but we are. And the fact is that you can take your pain and your suffering and help it to make the kingdom bigger. So I would totally encourage you to do that.
I love that so much. And just what you said, Tianna, it just makes me think about how that's our purpose here on earth. And there's nothing that can fulfill us more than that. And so even amidst the pain that you're experiencing, God will bring you so much fulfillment in being able to plays such a huge part in advancing his kingdom. That's so incredible. Guys, thank you so much for your wisdom and for, again, your willingness to share. And Caleb touched on this a little bit, and I just want to say it to you guys too. If you're sitting here right now and you're like, okay, well, I've not lost someone in my life, and I understand it's going to happen at some point in my life. I hope it doesn't happen anytime soon, so I'm probably going to forget about this. And maybe you're just thinking, like, how does this relate to me? So I gave you guys the definition of grief at the beginning, and it was deep sorrow, especially caused by someone's death, but it doesn't have to be caused by someone's death. Grief is also just deep sorrow. And so we are coming out of a year where COVID caused you guys to miss out on a lot. And maybe you guys are grieving seasons of your life that you're not going to get back. Maybe senior year, or you guys aren't seniors anymore, but junior year was really hard for you because of what you missed out on. Maybe you're grieving that loss, or maybe your parents recently got divorced and you're grieving the loss of both your parents being together and being at home every single day. Or maybe you just got an injury that ended your sports season for this year and you're grieving that loss. Or you just got out of a relationship and you're heartbroken and you're grieving that. And so we can think about grief in a lot of different ways, and so much of what Tianna, Sara, and Caleb shared tonight can be applied to different kinds of grief. And so I want you guys to keep that in mind as you head to groups tonight. But before we do that, can we just give them a round of applause and thank them so much for sharing with us? Okay. Awesome. So I'm going to pray, and then we're going to head to groups. So, dear Jesus, thank you so much just for your goodness and your faithfulness and the way that you redeem things in our life, God, that are so painstakingly just hard, God, but you're still good, and you're able to turn even the most awful things that we go to into something good, God, and so we're so grateful for that. And I just pray for each of our students tonight, God, give them just a courage and willingness to share during group tonight, God, and help them to see how if they're not experiencing loss right now in their life, that these things can still apply to just other difficult things that are going through in life right now. And God, so I pray that you would just give them the courage to open up about that, give our leaders the words to say in group tonight, God. And I just pray that you continue to bless Caleb and Tianna and Sara, God, just for their faithfulness to you and their firm trust in you through all that they've been through, God. Continue to use them in the incredible ways that you have to advance your kingdom. I pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.